Autism Rights Movement, Wikipedia Audio. The Autism Rights Movement, also known as the Autistic Culture Movement, is a social movement within the neurodiversity and disability rights movements that encourages autistic people, their caregivers, and society to adopt a position of neurodiversity, accepting autism as a variation in functioning rather than a disorder to be cured. The ARM advocates a variety of goals including a greater acceptance of autistic behaviors, therapies that teach autistic individuals coping skills rather than therapies focused on imitating behaviors of neurotypical peers, the creation of social networks and events that allow autistic people to socialize on their own terms, and the recognition of the autistic community as a minority group. Autism rights or neurodiversity advocates believe that the autism spectrum is genetic and should be accepted as a natural expression of the human genome. This perspective is distinct from two other likewise distinct views: the mainstream perspective, that autism is caused by a genetic defect and should be addressed by targeting the autism gene, and the fringe theory that autism is caused by environmental factors like vaccines and pollution and could be cured by addressing environmental causes. The movement is controversial. There are a wide variety of both supportive and critical opinions about the movement among people who are autistic or associated with people with autism. A common criticism leveled against autistic activists is that the majority of them are high-functioning or have Asperger syndrome and do not represent the views of all autistic people, although some prominent figures in the movement are nonverbal and have been labeled as low-functioning. History. Jim Sinclair was the first individual to communicate the anti-cure or autism rights perspective in the late 1980s. In 1992, Sinclair Co. founded the Autism Network International, an organization that publishes newsletters written by and for autistic people. Other individuals involved in the creation of the ANI were Donna Williams and Kathy Grant, two autistic individuals who knew Sinclair through pen pal lists and autism conferences. The first issue of the ANI newsletter, Our Voice, was distributed online in November 1992, to an audience of mostly neurotypical professionals and parents of young autistic children. The number of autistics in the organization grew slowly, over the years, and it eventually became a communication network for like-minded autistics. In 1996, a yearly retreat known as O-Treat was established. O-Treat is a United States retreat and conference hosted by the autism rights organization Autism Network International, specifically for autistic people. As of 2012, O-Treat has been held every year, except for 2001. In 2004, Michelle Dawson challenged applied behavior analysis on ethical grounds. She testified in Auden v. British Columbia against the required government funding of ABBA. That same year, the New York Times covered the autism rights perspective by publishing Amy Harmon's article, How About Not Curing Us? Some Autistics Are Pleading. Aspies for Freedom was founded in 2004, and established June 18 as Autistic Pride Day starting in 2005. AF was also instrumental in initiating protests against the National Alliance for Autism Research, Cure Autism Now, and the Judge Rotenberg Center. In 2006, the Autism Acceptance Project was founded by Estée Clar, the mother of an autistic child, with help from an autistic advisory and board. The project affiliated with the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network and other activist groups in North America and was one of the first to sign the petition against the New York Child Study Campaign. It is also recognized by ASAN in a letter to the United Nations of being one of the first autism organizations to promote autism acceptance. From 2005 to 8, TAA Project organized arts-based events to show the public an active autism rights movement that burgeoned online. In addition, it sponsored the controversial Joy of Autism, Redefining Ability and Quality of Life events and lectures in Toronto, featuring dozens of autistic artists and speakers including Jim Sinclair, Michelle Dawson, Phil Schwartz, Morton and Jernsbacher, Larry Bissonette, and more. In 2014, TAA Project worked with York University to bring nonverbal autistic self-advocates who type to communicate, Larry Bissonette and Tracy Thresher, to discuss autism and screen the film Wretches and Jabberers. Estee Clark continues her work also in critical disability studies at York University in Toronto. In 2008, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network succeeded in halting 2 ad campaigns it stated were demeaning to autistics. The first ads were a series published by the NYU Child Studies Center that appeared in the form of ransom notes. One read, "We have your son. We will make sure he will no longer be able to care for himself or interact socially as long as he lives. This is only the beginning," and was signed, Autism. The second ads were published by PETA and featured a bowl of milk with the leftover bits of cereal forming a frowning face. The text read, "Got autism," and was meant to advertise what PETA claims is a link between autism and the casein in milk. Phone calls, letters and petitions organized by ASAN led to the removal of these ads. The rise of the Internet has provided more opportunities for autistic individuals to connect and organize. Considering the geographical distance, communication, and speech patterns of autistic individuals, and the domination of neurotypical professionals and family members in established autism organizations, the Internet has provided an invaluable space for members of the movement to organize and communicate. Some autistic rights activists believe some characteristics described as being autistic traits are actually misconceptions. Michelle Dawson has disputed the belief that 75% of autistic people have low intelligence. Psychiatrist Laurent Matron of Hôpital Rivière des Prairies in Montreal says that autistic people often score much higher on a nonverbal test of abstract reasoning than on a standard IQ test. The UK's National Autistic Society claims the proportion of autistics with intellectual disability to be between 44% and 52%, a lower figure. Some autistics have claimed that non-autistics are insensitive to their perspectives, and write parodies based on this, addressing what they call autism as a mental disorder characterized by lack of theory of other minds. Perspectives. Jim Sinclair, who has also been a target of similar criticism from very early on, goes into detail about the politics of opposition to self-advocacy. The controversy has erupted on autism email lists, where QRB is used as a derogatory term for parents who are portrayed as slaves to conformity, so anxious for their children to appear normal that they cannot respect their way of communicating. These parents respond that this attitude shows a typical autistic lack of empathy by suggesting that they should not try to help their children. Lenny Schaefer said that the autism-like lack of empathy of anti-cure activists prevent them from seeing what is in the hearts of pro-cure advocates. Autism is classified by psychologists as a disorder, rather than the variation in functioning preferred by supporters of neurodiversity, with an attendant focus on the burden placed on society in caring for autistic individuals. Caring for autistic individuals has been compared to treating a patient with cancer, though extended over the duration of a normal lifespan. Autistic children have also been described as being held hostage to a psychiatric disorder. Others have used the term mad child disease to describe autism, which some autistic individuals and their parents have found highly offensive. Margaret Somerville, founding director of the McGill Center for Medicine, Ethics, and Law, said that with activism there is a direct goal and it is sometimes necessary to sacrifice complexity and nuance to make a point, but some autistic activists don't believe desperation justifies the rhetoric. Bennett L. Leventhal said he understands concern about comparing autistic children to hostages but thinks the campaigns make the point that these are real diseases that will consume children if untreated. Autistic rights activists also reject terming the reported increase in autism diagnoses as an epidemic since the word implies autism is a disease. Attempts have been made to place a figure on the financial cost of autism, addressed to both scholarly and popular audiences. These efforts have been criticized by some autism rights advocates, who compare them to similar calculations about persons with bad heredity made by the eugenics movement in the early 20th century, a movement currently in disrepute. Michelle Dawson has pointed out that no effort has been made to examine the cost of eliminating the disease to autistic individuals, and she, as well as others, have also pointed out the valuable contributions autistic individuals can, and have made to society. Dr. Temple Grandin has speculated that an autistic caveman probably invented the first stone spear, and that if autism were eliminated, society would lose most of its scientists, musicians, and mathematicians. Some autistic activists say it is not easy to distinguish between high and low functioning. Some autistic individuals, in contrast, are supportive of the distinction between the low and high functioning labels as well as autism and Asperger syndrome, and believe it is important in helping individuals get proper consultation and treatment. Some autistic activists suggest that life with autism is very much like being born among people who speak a different language, have a religion or philosophy one does not share, and live a lifestyle that feels alien. To put it differently, autists have an individual culture that's often very different from their environment. A common theme expressed among autism rights activists and neurodiversity groups is that they are different from parent and professional-led organizations and conferences that dominate the autism scene. Michelle Dawson criticizes the norm of allowing parents to speak on behalf of their autistic children at conferences to the exclusion of autistics. With the happy and proud collaboration of governments, courts, researchers, service providers, and funding bodies, she says, parents have succeeded in removing autistics from the vicinity of any important discussions or decisions. This exclusion results in policy and treatment decisions being made solely by individuals who do not directly experience autism. Autism is not a disorder. Autistic people have their own culture. Jim Sinclair states that autism conferences are traditionally geared toward neurotypical parents and professionals, and that to an autistic person they may be quite hostile in terms of sensory stimulation and rigidity. Autistic people require inclusion in the autism debate. Autism therapy is often unethical. Autism genes should not be eliminated. Notion of curing autism is offensive. Autism speaks boycott. In defiance of the common complaint that anti-cure advocates' ability to articulate complex opinions in writing, which some critics see as being impossible for autistic people, autistic adults such as Amanda Baggs use their own writing and videos to demonstrate that it is possible for severely disabled autistics to be autism rights advocates. She says that when the critics assume that intelligent and articulate autistic people do not have difficulties like self-injurious behavior and difficulty with self-care, they affect the opinions of policy makers and make it more difficult for intelligent and articulate autistic people to get services. Baggs cites an example of an autistic person who was denied services when it was discovered that she could type. Aspies for Freedom stated that the most common therapies for autism are unethical, since they focus on extinguishing harmless stimming, forcing eye contact and breaking routines. AF argued that ABA therapy and restriction of stimming and other autistic coping mechanisms are mentally harmful, that aversion therapy and the use of restraints are physically harmful, and that alternative treatments like chelation are dangerous. Michelle Dawson, a Canadian autism self-advocate, testified in court against government funding of ABA therapy. An autistic person named Jane Myerding criticized therapy which attempts to remove autistic behaviors because she says that the behaviors that the therapy tries to remove are attempts to communicate. Since those in the autism rights movement see autism as a natural human variation and not a disorder, they are opposed to attempts to eliminate autism. In particular, there is opposition to prenatal genetic testing of autism in unborn fetuses, which some believe might be possible in the future. Some worry that this can prevent autistic people from being born. On February 23, 2005, Joseph Buxbaum of the Autism Genome Project at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai said there could be a prenatal test for autism within 10 years. However, the genetics of autism have proven to be extremely complex. In any case, the autistic genocide clock was started in response to this, which counts down to 10 years after Buxbaum made this announcement. The public has started to debate the ethics involved in the possible elimination of a genotype that has liabilities and advantages, which may be seen as tampering with natural selection. Autism rights groups. Some people lament that professionals, such as social workers, may discourage autistics from having children. Some are concerned that the ultimate cure will be a genetic test to prevent autistic children from being born and that most autistic fetuses would be aborted if prenatal tests for autism are developed. Curing or treating autism is a controversial and politicized issue. Doctors and scientists are not sure of the cause of autism, yet many organizations like Autism Research Institute and Autism Speaks advocate researching a cure. Members of the various autism rights organizations view autism as a way of life rather than as a disease and thus advocate acceptance over a search for a cure. Some advocates believe that common therapies for the behavioral and language differences associated with autism, like applied behavior analysis, are not only misguided but also unethical. The anti-cure perspective endorsed by the movement is a view that autism is not a disorder, but a normal occurrence, an alternate variation in brain wiring or a less common expression of the human genome. Advocates of this perspective believe that autism is a unique way of being that should be validated, supported, and appreciated rather than shunned, discriminated against or eliminated. They believe the quirks and uniqueness of autistic individuals should be tolerated as the differences of any minority group should be tolerated, and that efforts to eliminate autism should not be compared, for example, to curing cancer but instead to the antiquated notion of curing left-handedness. The ARM is a part of the larger disability rights movement, and as such acknowledges the social model of disability. Within the model, struggles faced by autistic people are viewed as discrimination rather than deficiencies. Jim Sinclair, a leader in the movement, argues that autism is essential to a person, not a disease secondary to the person. Sinclair says that wishing that an autistic person be cured is equivalent to wishing that they disappear and another completely different person exist in their place. Visions for a future where autism has been eradicated, Sinclair believes, is the desire to end the autistic culture. Some movement members with Asperger syndrome, who do not have the language differences typical of autistic individuals, believe their way of life should be respected and they should be left alone completely. Other members agree that autistics should not be made to act exactly like everyone else, but that they should receive therapy to help them learn to communicate in innovative ways or regulate emotions. Simon Baron-Cohen, a professor of developmental psychology at Trinity College, Cambridge, and an autism researcher, expressed the latter view. Baron-Cohen said, "As the most recognized name in autism advocacy worldwide, Autism Speaks is seen as representative of autism, particularly advocacy of a cure. As a result, Autism Speaks is implicated in perpetuating misconceptions, including inaccurate diagnostic criteria, functioning labels, person-first language, the medical model of disability, equation of communication and intelligence, promotion of abotherapy, comparisons between autism and diseases, the view of rising autism diagnosis rates as an epidemic, the concept of autism as something separable from people with autism, the view of children with autism as trapped or broken, the belief that married couples who have children with autism are more likely to divorce, and the belief that parent-on-child murder is caused by lack of services." In addition to its cultural impact, Autism Speaks has been criticized for ignoring and excluding people with autism. Until he resigned in 2013, John Elder Robison was the organization's only board member openly recognized as being on the autism spectrum. His resignation came 2 days after the release of an op-ed by the group's co-founder Suzanne Wright which, according to Robison, is simply not defensible for someone who feels as I do, and I cannot continue to stand up for the public actions of an organization that makes the same mistakes over and over again by failing to connect to the community it purports to represent. Simone Greggs, the mother of a child with autism, filed a lawsuit against Autism Speaks for disability discrimination after her job offer was rescinded. The suit alleges that she lost the job offer due to asking for an accommodation on behalf of her son. Events and activities. Autism Speaks has produced 3 major films, each met with strong opposition from the autistic community. Autism Every Day is a documentary featuring interviews of parents with mostly negative opinions about autism and their situations. It has been criticized due to parents speaking about their children as if they are not there. In one interview, former board member Allison Singer, mother of a daughter with autism, reveals she contemplated murder-suicide with her daughter in the same room. I Am Autism is a short video that personifies autism as a narrative voice, which compares itself to several diseases and makes the false claim of causing divorce. Sounding the Alarm is a documentary exploring the transition to adulthood and the cost of lifetime care. It was criticized for being full of dehumanizing rhetoric and portraying ignorance of nonverbal communication. Because of the number of objections to the organization, Autism Speaks fundraising events have been the object of organized protest. Many of these protests are organized by the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. In 2013, the organization Boycott Autism Speaks published a list of companies that donate money to Autism Speaks along with their contact information, urging those in the autistic community to pressure those companies into dropping their support via an active boycott, since direct appeals to Autism Speaks did not result in the desired changes. A month later, ASAN published its 2014 joint letter to the sponsors of Autism Speaks, signed by 26 different disability-related organizations, appealing to the moral responsibility of the sponsors, donors, and other supporters. Criticisms and counter-movements. There are several organizations in the autism rights movement. Some, like the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, are led exclusively by autistic people, while others, such as Autism National Committee, encourage cooperation between autistic people and their non-autistic allies. Parents with the perspective of autism as a disorder believe that therapy with the intent of extinguishing stereotypically autistic behavior is in their children's best interests. They see this as a treatment that will reduce their children's suffering. These critics say ABBA gives autistic children the best chance of success in adulthood, as they either do not believe it is possible that adult society could accommodate autistic people, or they do not believe it is desirable to do so. Prominent figures. Notes. Some parents believe that intensive behavioral therapy is the only way to alleviate autistic children's disabilities. Some critics also fear that the movement will prevent autistic children from receiving important therapies. Kit Weintraub has responded to Michelle Dawson's claims that ABBA is harmful by insisting that it is medically necessary and appropriate treatment, and that it is harmful to deny it to autistic children who need it. There are also accusations about how well autistic people of different functioning levels are represented in the movement. Critics of the movement argue that anyone on the autism spectrum who is able to express their desire not to be cured must be high-functioning autistic or have Asperger syndrome. Lenny Schaefer argues that if every use of autism were changed to read Asperger syndrome, then the movement might make sense, although the incorporation of Asperger syndrome into the autism diagnosis in the DSM-5 has been used as a counter-argument by the autism rights movement. Sue Rubin, the subject of the Oscar-nominated documentary Autism is a World, is an example of an autistic adult who is aligned with the cure group. In her opinion, people with Asperger syndrome can communicate well and pass for normal, while low-functioning people have a severe disability. Low-functioning people are just trying to get through the day without hurting, tapping, flailing, biting, screaming, etc. The thought of a gold pot of a potion with a cure really would be wonderful. Jonathan Mitchell, an autistic author and blogger who advocates for a cure for autism, has described autism as having prevented me from making a living or ever having a girlfriend. It's given me bad fine motor coordination problems where I can hardly write. I have an impaired ability to relate to people. I can't concentrate or get things done. He describes neurodiversity as a tempting escape valve.